Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Jason. How are you tonight?
Pretty good. It's weird. It's almost Christmas and we had a crazy chock full of news week out of Cavalry, which I wouldn't have put on my bingo card earlier this year.
No, we did know that there was going to be the draft as well as the reveal about the CONCACAF Champions Cup opponent in mid-December. So we wanted to do one last episode of the year of 2023 before taking a bit of a holiday break. And it's very lucky that we are recording on a Friday this week rather than our usual Thursday night recording time, because obviously some big Cavalry-related news broke today, and we get to talk about that.
For sure. But before we jump in, I always like to ask you this question, Scott, so let's just go over it. If you are a new listener to our podcast, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about?
So our podcast focuses on all things soccer-related in Calgary. We talk about amateur, collegiate, and professional soccer with a Calgary focus. We talk about the teams and the players from Calgary's soccer community, all the way from the grassroots and amateur levels up to the university and professional teams.
Yeah, and this week we're going to keep it pretty Cavs focused, and we're going to talk about how Cavalry and Orlando City have been paired up. We'll talk about the CanPL draft and also talk about Mo Farsi winning the MLS Cup.
Yeah, we also managed to secure an interview shortly before recording this episode with Mason Trafford, former Cavalry captain and the club's current commercial director.
Yeah, and that's where the unfortunate news of the week happened, where we found out that the matches between Orlando and Cavalry the home match is going to end up being in Victoria. So it is obviously, I think, really disappointing. I'm disappointed. I think everybody's disappointed. It was announced today that the home leg for Cavalry will be played at the home of Pacific FC, Starlight Stadium in Victoria, or I guess Langford more accurately. And then the other leg will be played in Orlando as per usual. So what are your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I was disappointed when I saw it. I can sympathize with the members of the club. They broke the news relatively early. It's not like they're saying this 2 or 3 weeks out before the game. But it's naturally disappointing, right? This is one of Cavalry's biggest games in their history, and they're not going to be able to play it in Calgary, let alone at ATCO Field. I think everybody thought that in the event that Spruce Meadows was not going to be ready to host a game in mid-February, that there was a contingency plan to play it at McMahon Stadium, or even Commonwealth Stadium up in Edmonton would be what most people probably figured a worst-case scenario. But we'll run our interview with Mason Trafford later on in the episode. He goes into it a little more. But Cavalry's president, Ian Allison, came out with a statement today basically acknowledging that it's very disappointing. They wanted to find a solution, but the match is not going to be feasible. It's going to be dangerous for players. There's a lot of unpredictability. You have to imagine that CONCACAF wouldn't have been happy about the arrangement. Probably the same with Orlando City. So even with a mild start to winter this winter, unfortunately, frost is already quite deep in the subsurface of the Spruce Meadows pitch. So they came up with the contingency plan of hosting it out in Langford, which is, it's the words that Mason Trafford used in the interview were devastating. So devastating for the club, devastating for the fans.
Yeah, and I know, having conversations with people in the front office after they had qualified for the Champions Cup, the full intention was to make this happen. They were working on plans. They had plans of trying to keep the field in a reasonable state, and that was the original plan. And clearly, I think when it all came right down to it, there was just too much risk and overall that it just couldn't happen. And this is when you look at it, at the end of the day, a lot of this is about business and money, and the Cavs are going to lose huge money by not having this game at Spruce Meadows. Having it in Victoria, they're going to only make a fraction of the ticket revenue that they would make here. And the publicity and the awareness in the middle of their off season would have helped sell season tickets. It would have helped sell corporate sponsorships. It would have been huge. And I don't think they are very begrudgingly letting all that go because they kind of have no choice, I think.
Yeah, I do wonder if behind the scenes CONCACAF said, no, you cannot host the game there in Spruce Meadows. I mean, that's not what they've said, right? Cavalry hasn't come out and said that, but I do wonder if maybe that played a part. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a huge opportunity for Cavalry to boost not only their revenues, but also their reputation. There's been a lot of great promotion for this upcoming tie with a North American powerhouse, like in local media. I think people were getting pretty hyped about it, and to find out so soon after the reveal of the club that Cavalry is going to play, to find out that game is going to be happening, like 1,200, 1,500 kilometers away is a tough pill to swallow. I'm curious to see if Cavalry is able to do anything to help fans get to Victoria or make it up to them in some way later on in the season in the form of discounts or free swag. I don't know what's feasible financially, but there's going to be a little bit of damage control in the days and weeks to come, I think, from Cavalry.
Well, definitely. And I think this is how I'm looking at it. This would have been, even if it was on a cold night in February, it would have been huge for the club. And now it's basically been reduced to a handful of the hardcores are going to be sitting there watching it on One Soccer, and it's going to completely escape the mainstream of Calgary mainstream media, the mainstream attention, and everything associated with that. So,
and I know, people, when they found out that the opponent was Orlando City, were immediately, looking at flights to Florida, right? Like people were like, I want to watch Cavalry play Orlando. I want to do an away trip. It's a sunny destination. There's other attractions in the city. You can make a vacation out of it. And I still think a lot of Cavalry, not a lot, but I still think some Cavalry fans are going to do that. But I don't know if people can do that trip in addition to another trip on a plane with potentially an overnight, even if it's in Canada and a short plane ride away. I don't think there's going to be that many Cavalry fans going out to Victoria for this one.
Yeah, it's a big ask, I think. But before we run the interview with Mason Trafford, why don't we talk a little bit about Orlando City? They're a club that I think had a pretty good season last year. Scott, you want to do a bit of a recap and tell us what we kind of know about Orlando right now, and we'll go from there.
Right. So Orlando was a conference semi-finalist in the MLS playoffs this year. They lost out to eventual winners Columbus Crew, 2-0 in that match. But they were a really strong regular season club. They finished with an 18-9-7 record, which I believe put them in second place in the Eastern Conference behind Cincinnati. So they're one of the league's toughest sides. I ran through their roster. I have to confess I didn't recognize a lot of names, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And clearly they're a team that got used to winning in 2023. I talked to Mason about this when I did the interview. He talked about how, in MLS, there's quite a bit of roster turnover every year. So it's still kind of TBD which players will be on Orlando a few months from now. But you have to think that with the season they just had, no matter who's out there, it's going to be a very strong opponent, probably the toughest opponent Cavalry has ever played. And I wanted to mention something that you put a tweet out earlier, comparing Cavalry's transfer market value with Orlando's, and it was something like 4 or 5 million for Cavalry and 67 or 65 million for Orlando. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what those figures were.
That sounds about right from what I remember. So it was the high 60s for Orlando, and Cavalry was 4 point some million. So yeah, when you look at it that way, it's really sounds quite daunting because it's 15 times the value.
Yeah, 15 times the financial value of their players' market values. So it's a definite David versus Goliath situation, but it's a cup, right? It's a cup tournament, and we know that anything can happen when it's a one-off or two-off game, right? So obviously, I think Cavalry's chances of progressing are slim, especially now that they're losing their home field advantage for one of the matches. But overall, I mean, even if they're losing 4 or 5-0, which I hope they don't. I hope that they're able to make a good name for themselves. I mean, it's an honor to be on the same field as some of those guys.
Definitely. And I think, what you're saying, like if they were going to play an America or a Tigres or whatever, like I think there was literally no chance. But with Orlando, they're also in the beginning of their training. Maybe there's been some roster turnover. Maybe they don't take this tournament as seriously. You never know. Like maybe. But it's not impossible to get a result. But the odds are clearly stacked against them. But it'll be a good experience either way.
Yeah, I think though MLS probably starts their preseasons in January, so by mid-February they'll probably be pretty match fit. And I know the regular season in MLS tends to start in March, whereas Cavalry's regular season won't start until probably mid-April. Mm-hmm. But Mason did say that they'll probably resume full-time training in early January. So they'll have a month plus to prepare for this match. We still don't know the dates, but we know it's in around mid-February.
Yeah, I think the way it works, and I'm not completely sure about all this, but the home leg or the Victoria leg, whatever you want to call it, I think that will be first, and then the Orlando leg would be second. And it has to be done by the end of February. I think that the window essentially is from the first week in February to the fourth week in February. So someplace in there, I guess it's got to be on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, I believe. It can't be on weekends. So that's what we're looking at from a scheduling standpoint. And I'm guessing that we're probably going to see something. They're probably going to firm that up pretty quickly, I would presume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you mentioned there with this being a midweek evening game also played a factor, apparently, in the decision to relocate the game. We know February is cold, and it especially is cold once the sun goes down. So there was a possibility that, this game was going to be scheduled for a day that ended up being minus 35 with wind chill and the sun is down. So, no matter what state the field is in, you can't really ask professional players to play in those conditions.
For sure. And I think let's just segue in and let's put on that interview with Mason Trafford right now. And we've referenced it a few times. So let's just play it now and everyone can have a chance to listen to it. We can maybe do a little bit of further commenting on it after it's over. So here's our interview with Mason Trafford.
I'd like to welcome Mason Trafford to the podcast. Mason is the commercial director for Cavalry FC. And of course, as most of our listeners probably know, he was formerly a player and captain for Cavalry, suiting up for the club's back four or back three for 4 seasons. Mason, thanks for coming on our podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
So first off, we do have to ask about the venue change for the upcoming CONCACAF Champions Cup game against Orlando. I've already seen some upset fans on Twitter and things like that, including the Foot Soldiers. Can you talk to us about Cavalry's perspective on this decision, why it had to be made and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I understand the fans are upset. I'm upset. I think the whole club is upset, and we will, explore the option of making a follow-up statement to shed some clarity on that. But as you mentioned, this all just went down not too long ago, and we are evaluating as we speak here. But honestly, I hope everybody would understand that we want to play the game in Calgary. Of course we do. This is a bad situation, or not a bad situation, but it's not an ideal situation for the club in any sense. Like, why would we want to go play in Starlight? The reality is we looked at every option to try to host the match here in Calgary, on ATCO Field, or even in our province, and it just wasn't possible. And we analyzed them. There was a huge risk matrix around this decision. And I'm sure everybody, if you start to think about it, soccer in February, natural grass, this isn't an exhibition game against a local team that if you have to cancel it because it's minus 30 and unsafe to play, everybody just goes back in their cars to their respective homes. You're welcoming a top team from our continent, and you really have to make sure that the players are going to be safe, the fans are going to be safe, you respect the integrity of the match and the competition. you respect our reputation, even as Calvary FC. What are we going to play? Like, what's the state of a natural grass field after 3 months of winter here in Calgary? And even if every single thing was ticked off and every box was checked, there's still an element of potential for -30 and even colder with wind chill, and quite a high possibility of that happening in Calgary. Reminder that this is a weeknight match as well, so it would be a nighttime game in one of the coldest months of the year. And even if every box was checked and you could somehow play on Atco Field, like the ref could call the game. It might not be safe for the players or for the fans to be in that type of cold. We did explore other options in Alberta, and unfortunately, those options were not feasible, and it was not in our control. We couldn't do it here. So next best thing was Starlight.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine the other options could have been one of the CFL stadiums in either Calgary or Edmonton, but those are uncovered, right, for fans, unsheltered from the elements. Did Orlando?
But not only that, Scott. And again, like, I know fans are upset. Again, we're upset. We don't get to host one of the biggest events in our history at home. That, I hope people look at that and like they surely must realize we don't normally elect to host games in another province unless there's pretty dire circumstances, or there's circumstances that we just can't control. So it's not just the elements. There are Google what's happening at Commonwealth in February, and you'll find the answer to that question without me having to say it. So it's just not available. And McMahon's turf is not approved by FIFA, and they would not permit a match to happen there. So there's literally just no solution that would have worked here in Alberta for this round of matchups. Just literally not possible.
I know you mentioned that there could be another statement forthcoming. But is there anything that you can think of off the top of your head that the club can do for fans to kind of make it up to them as a concession of sorts?
Well, I don't know if there's going to be a statement. I mean, I think I've said a lot of it here, to be honest, but we might. Again, it's very, very fresh, and it's I would frame it differently. Listen, like, we're devastated, we're gutted, we're heartbroken. To make it up to the fans, like, we feel for our fans. We feel like we're in this together. We're now having to try to put on a match in Langford in February, and it's a very challenging prospect logistically, operationally, after we had gone through exhaustive protocols here to try to host the game in Calgary. But I don't think it takes anybody all that long to realize that it's probably not feasible to do it on Atco Field, at least. And then I've just spoken about Commonwealth and McMahon, the other two obvious possibilities. It's not possible. So at least, I don't feel like there's like we have to make up for something. We're just playing with the cards we were dealt. We have to remember that this is more than just cavalry at play. This is our continent's governing body, and this is Major League Soccer opposition, Liga MX, and other league opposition, and there's protocols that have to be followed. And the only thing I can really say is, like, believe you me, like, we did everything we could to try to find a solution to play the game here so that our fans could take in this historic moment. And we are working now and looking at options to find solutions for our fans to watch both games now, the one in Orlando and the one that will take place at Starlight Stadium. We're doing our best. We're trying, but it's a very dynamic situation and one that we're trying to solve here literally as we speak.
For sure. I can definitely sympathize, Mason. In terms of home field advantage, is that something you feel like you will still have with this game being played in Victoria?
Well, that will be a really interesting question. I hope, again, we're going to try to make it as appealing as possible. We understand it's a big ask, though, for people to go there to watch that. It's not possible for everybody. I understand that. Like I said, we can't say it enough times. Like, it sucks. Like, we're, how fun would it have been to have it on Atco Field, or to have it at least somewhere where we could pack the house and play in this international global event. I think anybody that's listened to me in the media in the past, few weeks. Understood, how excited I was as a former player. Now as somebody that's working on the business side of the club, I think everybody knows how passionate I am about the club. So it hurts me. It hurts me to know that we're not going to be able to do it here. But I hope there will be some that travel, whether that's to Orlando, whether that's to Langford, whether that's to both. But again, we understand that that's not going to be possible for everybody for a lot of different reasons. And again, it's just the reality that we're facing, partly due just to the scheduling of this tournament. It's in February and we live in Alberta, so there's not much we can do about that.
I do want to ask about the opponent, mentioned off the top, and you've said a few times, Orlando City. How excited were members of Cavalry to be drawn against that particular club? I know it was actually brought up as an example before the draw took place.
Yeah, I mean, I love shifting gears now and talking about still an amazing tournament that our club's a part of, despite this, the news that dropped here just recently. So on the sporting side, I think it's a really strong draw for us, one that I'm excited about. I think Orlando is like an unbelievable team, and they had an unbelievable season last year. We know that they're in this tournament. They're Major League Soccer. They have history. They play at a beautiful stadium. I've played there, funny enough, with Miami FC and beat this same team in the US Open Cup. So personally, I feel like this is a good matchup because although they are heavily the favorites, I think this is a winnable match. We've beaten MLS teams in the past, so I think there's a fantastic chance for us here to go and take it to this team. And it's funny too, right? It's as you see in the MLS, there's usually a lot of turnover year over year in the MLS. I'm not sure 100% what the roster has done in Orlando, but it's not like a team that does super well one year isn't always, the same team the next year. So we'll see how they line up going into 2024. But I think as a club, it's an exciting draw for us and interesting teams and if we were to get through round one, interesting teams waiting for us in the next round.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking about the timing, like you said, this tournament taking place in February, which is fairly late in the preseason for MLS, but still technically the off season for the CPL. So what kind of time frame are Cavalry's players going to be resuming training, and how does the timing of the match make it difficult to scout Orlando City, their 2024 team? Because you'll probably have watched all of a lot of their 2023 matches, but like you said, it could be a different looking squad a few months from now.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a question for Tommy Wheeldon Jr. and his staff, but my understanding, at least right now, is that the players will be back like early in the new year and get to work for this February kickoff. I think the interesting thing about that is that I would imagine the MLS teams probably start no earlier than us, so hopefully the playing field's quite even on that. 100% you're right. Again, we'll have to have a look at Orlando's updated roster and what they've done year 2023 to now. It's going to be interesting. But, Tommy's assembled a pretty incredible staff of people, from video analysts and scouts and first team assistants and all of the people that I think will be well prepared to analyze as best you can at this time of year our opponent and develop a game plan, as we know he does, and he's done consistently over 5 years in the Canadian Premier League and against MLS opposition, to give it a proper go against Orlando City. And I feel really like, I guess to boil it down is hopefully optimistic about this matchup. It's super exciting.
Yeah, and two-legged affairs always are, it seems. Last thing I'll ask you today, Mason, is simply, I believe this is going to be the first time that a CPL club has taken on an American MLS team. What does it mean to Cavalry to have that first status attached to it?
I think it's another moment in history for our young club. I think we've made a lot of firsts in the league with a lot of the things we've done, from our first ever beating of an MLS team and the first ever title in 2019 and first ever, a lot of the player sales that we've made. And it's another, I think, feather in the cap to the club, and just a really cool moment again for I think our sport in this province and in Calgary, to know that that's the level that this club has reached in only a few short years. We're playing Major League Soccer opposition in Canada. We're playing Major League Soccer opposition in the United States, not in an exhibition game, not in preseason, but in like an internationally recognized soccer tournament. And there's also monster Mexican clubs in there. There's teams from all over North America, the Caribbean, Central America. I think this should get a lot of people's heads turning to go, wow, like this is again, like this is a big deal. And we're certainly proud of it. We're certainly excited, and it'll be a pretty fun home and away series, that's for sure.
For sure. Well, thanks for your time today, Mason. I think we can cap it there, but is there anything else you'd like to mention about this upcoming tie?
I think that's good, Scott. We're doing our best. We're really excited about the Champions Cup, and it's something that we're working on every day to try to bring to life on the field and off the field for our fans and for our players and everybody supporting the club.
Okay, thanks again to Mason. We really appreciate it. He actually had agreed to do this interview with us before all this went down with the venue change. Despite all the craziness and all of the phone calls I'm sure he was getting and emails, we could hear some beeping and stuff in the background of stuff happening. He still agreed to keep his interview time with us. So we sure do appreciate that. Thanks, Mason.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it would have been easy to say, hey, we have to reschedule. Today is way too crazy. And you're right, his phone did beep a few times during that interview. So I know that he was probably getting pulled in a few different directions, but no, I appreciated the transparency and the honesty. He loves Cavalry, right? Like Mason lives and breathes that club. So it's disappointing for him too. I'm sure he would have loved to watch his former teammates and his colleagues go out to play one of the United States' top teams at ATCO Field. So yeah, disappointing overall, but appreciate that he was still willing to do the interview.
For sure. And there was actually one more thing before we get off this topic that I want to mention. I did read someplace today, and I think it was Ian Allison, but anyway, I did see it mentioned somewhere that we also had to remember in this whole equation that the referee could have just said, they could have been more or less all ready to go. And if they had a referee from Costa Rica or whatever, and it was like -8 and the field was frozen, they could have just said, forget it, we're not playing. And I don't even understand exactly what happened then, but that would be super devastating and could be just, you can't argue if the referee says that. And for all we know, it would be someone in that situation who would just say, this is ridiculous. I've never experienced -8 before in my life. I'm not going to have a match in this. And meanwhile, we'd say, well, geez, it's actually not too bad out there today. Like so I think that there were all these weird factors that played into this. And the thing that kind of, concerns me going forward is that if the Cavs advance in this tournament in the future, are we just looking at the same scenario where they're not going to be able to play it again? If they qualify next year and we're probably looking at the same situation. And that's really kind of like disappointing, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I have to, wonder if CONCACAF gets lobbied by the Canadian clubs for that reason. It seems like the other clubs from Canada in this competition aren't going to have the same issues because their venues are FIFA approved turf, right? Forge in Hamilton at Tim Hortons Field, and then Vancouver Whitecaps, who get to play at Christine Sinclair Place. Or no, I think it's
yes.
But anyway, you're absolutely right, because Cavalry is such a strong CPL club. It's realistic to think that they will qualify for this tournament at the very least every once in a while. And I don't know if CONCACAF would be willing to consider rescheduling.
Yeah, I'm guessing not, because at the end of the day, it's not like America is asking for a reschedule. It's like there isn't quite the same weight behind it when it's a Canadian club. But one thing I wanted to do real quickly, and Scott, you can correct me on this, but I started thinking, because I'm a bit of a stadium infrastructure guy, I've always been sort of fascinated by that, but I was sort of running down the possibilities. Is there any place in Alberta, like Commonwealth? Yes, okay, it's FIFA approved turf, so we kind of know that, and we know that it's not available in February. But is there any place else in Alberta, Southern Alberta, Calgary, that could host this match? And honestly, I can't think of one place, because one of the problems that we have is any artificial turf field, any field turf field that has the football lines, the gridiron football lines sewn in, is immediately disqualified. And that's the state of McMahon. That's the state at Shoaldice Park, like at Howard Field. And then you even think about other venues, like I'll just throw out a few other examples, which are, probably not feasible, but you start thinking about it. University of Lethbridge, they've got a field. It's got 3,000 plus seats. It's got stitched in football lines. There's really no place that has FIFA approved turf and then has lights and dressing rooms and stands. It doesn't exist.
No, you're absolutely right. I thought about University of Lethbridge as well, because I think everything north of Calgary is just going to be, the climate side of it is just going to play too much of a factor. Yeah, I don't know the rules behind what kind of turf is allowed. So football lines automatically mean you can't play a CONCACAF game.
If there are football lines painted on there and you can kind of cover them up to a point, that maybe could be acceptable. But the whole idea that the lines are permanently stitched in, like essentially what happens at McMahon, if you go look at the field there, like they never paint it. It's just, they've actually got pieces of white turf that are on the sidelines and pieces of white turf on the yard lines. It's stitched straight in, and you can't do anything with that. So from a maintenance standpoint, it's beautiful if you're a football team, but it instantly disqualifies it being for soccer. Like, even if you say, well, soccer teams play there all the time. Well, that could be true. Soccer teams play at Howard Field all the time. It's never going to get approved as a FIFA approved field.
And you can run through all these different stadiums and scenarios and think, oh, how can there be nothing that's suitable for this particular matchup? But to be honest, when was the last time that a soccer team needed this kind of infrastructure in February, right? It's never happened before. So it's kind of an unprecedented problem.
Anything else you want to add in there, Scott, after I geeked out on stadium stuff and field turf?
No, I think we could probably move on to another Cavalry-related topic, which happened just the day before the reveal about Orlando, which was the U Sports draft.
Let's break down the U Sports draft, and Cavalry had 2 picks in the draft. Scott, why don't you start us off with the first round selection?
So the first round pick that Cavalry chose was a familiar name if you've listened to our podcast in recent months. Mount Royal University's captain and center back, Caden Rogozinski, who you actually predicted in our last episode would be one of the local Calgary U Sports players who had a decent chance of being drafted. This is actually the second time that Cavalry has picked Caden in the U Sports draft. They did so 2 years ago. This time around, Tommy Wheeldon Jr. referenced that he was selected by them before, but he said he's matured in the 2 years since, and he appears ready for the pro level now.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty solid pick. He's defender of the year in U Sports, all of U Sports, and it just seems like he's been a rock. So it seems like a relatively low risk pick. It seems like somebody that they know, someone they're familiar with, and someone who has sort of the right skill set. So hard to argue with it, I guess.
Yeah. I think Cavalry's strategy in the draft in the past has worked, right? Some of the picks that they've chosen have really excelled. Like if you think about Eric Cobbs, I believe he was a draft pick. Victor Latourie, when he rejoined Cavalry, I believe was initially as a draft pick.
Yes.
Joel Waterman was initially a draft pick before being offered a full contract. So they've had a lot of success with their draft selections. Not everyone, of course, has had that kind of success. There are probably an equal number of players who haven't, really gotten their foot in the door in terms of playing for the first team. But I do like how they tend to focus on the Calgary schools. Like they've they've drafted from Dinos, they've drafted from MRU multiple times. I like how they kind of do that.
The second round pick for the Cavs is from the University of Alberta Golden Bears, Rodan Cato. Go for it, Scott. I know you did a little bit of research on him, so tell us what you know.
Yeah, not too much, honestly. I was a little surprised by the selection, but I know it was later in the draft, and a lot of other players who I kind of thought might get picked were already picked by other teams. So Rodan Cato, he's a central midfielder for the Golden Bears. Listeners may remember Bruno Zebi, who is a former Cavalry and Foothills PDL player for Tommy Wheeldon Jr. He's now an assistant coach over with the Golden Bears. So he would have had a good assessment of Cato for either Tofa or Tommy, whoever was arranging this. But looks like, he plays in the center of the midfield. Cavalry seems to like their central midfielders from Edmonton. If you think about Schmidt Shom and Bruno Zebi in the past, they've shown a willingness to recruit players from Edmonton. And now that there's no club in Edmonton, it really does kind of expand Cavalry's catchment area for local talent.
I think it's interesting because one of the things I don't think we've mentioned it yet is that the Cavs actually traded up to get this pick. So what I get out of that is they really wanted to make sure they got the person at this spot, and otherwise, why would you bother trading up? So they must have really thought that someone else was going to grab him before then, or they just really want to prioritize it. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting because as far as I'm aware, that has never happened before in a CanPL draft where there's been some swapping of picks.
It was. I didn't know they were allowed to do that, but it definitely felt like I was listening or reading a story about like a hockey or NFL draft, because I know they do that a lot in other sports. U of A was a really strong team in the Prairie division this year, right? They were kind of jostling for first with MRU. So I believe Cato was, a key figure in that MRU team, which was really strong. I remember, if you recall, Marcus Villado-Tsegay from FC Edmonton, he was one of their linchpins this year. So they drafted from two very strong U Sports teams.
One more topic I think we wanted to touch on before we wrapped up here is we had another story of a former Cav player doing well in his post-Cav career. This past week, Columbus Crew won the MLS Cup, and a player who has very quickly become a key part of the team is Mo Farsi. And I think we all remember Mo Farsi from his couple years with the Cavs. So it's quite the progression, wouldn't you say, Scott?
Yeah, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but is he not the first former CPL player to win the MLS Cup?
As far as I know, yes, that's true.
Yeah, I think I saw like One Soccer tweet that out or something. But yeah, I mean, a lot of Cavalry fans will probably remember Mo Farsi. He was kind of a revelation in the 2020 Island Games, and then he continued that positive form into 2021. Was one of Cavalry's best players that year, and rightfully earned a move to Columbus Crew. Took him a while to break into the first team. I think at first for a whole year or so he was playing for the reserves, Columbus Crew too. But yeah, he's 24 years old now. Or no, he's turning 24 tomorrow. His birthday, he's in 1999 born. So yeah, he's definitely established himself as a Columbus Crew first team player. According to his Wikipedia page, he's played like 36 games for them since last year. So definitely is a CPL success story. And yeah, Columbus Crew, I don't know. I didn't expect them to beat LAFC. I have to confess, I didn't watch MLS in 2023, but judging on previous seasons that I have paid more attention, I really thought LAFC was going to win. They were the defending champions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he had a great game in the final. I was following along like via Twitter feeds and stuff, and apparently he was really tearing it up in that game.
This is really an example. Like, I think, we talk about players getting sold on to teams in Europe, and you look at like a Victor Laturi or even a Goten Natigny, that sort of thing. Now, I think Mo Farsi is, even though the Cavs didn't benefit from the sale, he's the perfect example of somebody that, if it wasn't for the CanPL, this guy would be playing futsal in Quebec, because that's what he was doing before he got the chance to play for the Cavs. He was, I think, playing Week 1 Quebec, or PLSQ, whatever it was called at the time, and he was playing futsal in the winter. And then the opportunity came up to go to an open tryout with Cavalry, where it was one of these things where they just, I think they invite a few people, but it's also where if you just think you want to give it a go, you give them like $70 or whatever it is, and they put you through the paces, and that's how they found him. And it's just, if there wasn't a team at this level looking for players, like I said, I think he'd probably be playing futsal in Montreal right now.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. That's I hadn't even really thought about that. That's how his time with Cavalry started. I do recall, was he with Blainville, AS Blainville, that team in Quebec that was in the Canadian Championship in 2019? I thought he was.
Maybe. I'm not sure about that. One thing I do know is he was never on the radar of the Impact. He was never part of the Impact setup, or I guess now they're whatever. CF Montreal, thank you. He was never part of their world, their development process. So he was not somebody, like lots of times we see some of these players that end up in the CPL and they're, former Whitecap Academy, former TFC Academy. This guy was completely off the radar screen of CF Montreal, and was just someone who was playing. And really, I don't think there was tons of awesome opportunities for him, but then when he did have the chance with the Cavs, he totally took advantage of it.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. Good for him. Happy to see that success.
So I think we'll wrap up this episode of the YYC Soccer Podcast. We were thinking before that we were going to kind of have a final recap, end of the year show, but I think that this one sort of has replaced that. So we'll be back in the new year, definitely in advance of the Champions Cup game. Start a new season of these episodes. I hope you've enjoyed them, Scott. I've really enjoyed doing this. I think it's been a lot of fun, and I want to thank you. This is something that I think I threw out as an idea a couple times to you, and when you got a hold of me and said that you thought it might work, I was quite happy. And so anyway, I just want to let you know that I don't want to get too mushy or anything, but thanks for being part of all this. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Of course. No, I share that sentiment. This is a fun thing that we've put together. Obviously, I think we're 30 plus episodes in, and I think we've had a lot of really interesting discussions. We've had a lot of great guests on our podcast over the months, and I don't know of anyone else who's really doing this. I think there are people who maybe blog or podcast about Cavalry, but we've cast our net a little wider than that. I know this episode was very Cavalry focused, but if you have any interest in soccer in Calgary, I think this podcast is a good place to get some of your news and insights. So no, I'm excited to see where the podcast goes in 2024.
We covered the gamut, so I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, me too. And even beyond what's currently going on, we've had a couple of guests and episodes that focused on Calgary's soccer history, which is something that I really have developed an interest in. Guys who played for the Calgary Kickers in the 1980s, and Tommy Wheeldon Sr., who talked about coaching the Storm in the early 2000s. So I love that side of it too, and I have more to say about that in 2024, talking about Calgary's soccer history. Yeah, and I know way back in our first episode we were talking about who we wanted to get on the podcast, and we talked about Lutz Pfannenstiel, and we talked about Kevin McKenna, and we still haven't gotten either of those guys on the podcast, but who knows, maybe in 2024 we'll get that done.
For sure. Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast using all the usual podcasting platforms. Head over to our website at yycsoccer.com for more information about how to subscribe or leave a question or comment. And you can follow us on Twitter at YYCSoccer403. Thanks for listening.